They said I broke the rules. They said my yard, my driveway, even the way I parked my own car somehow threatened the harmony of the neighborhood. At first, it was just letters slipped under my door. But soon, the fines started piling up, hundreds, then thousands of dollars for things I didn't even do. And behind it all, a board of neighbors who seemed obsessed with controlling every inch of my property. But what they didn't know was that their power wasn't nearly as strong as they believed. In fact, they were about to discover a secret that would change everything. So what happens when the HOA finally picks a fight with the wrong homeowner? For years, life in Willow Creek Estates seemed picture-perfect. Neatly trimmed hedges lined the sidewalks, driveways gleamed under the afternoon sun, and every house matched the others just enough to feel uniform, but not enough to feel soulless. To outsiders, it looked like the kind of neighborhood where everyone waved at each other, where kids rode their bikes until the streetlights came on, and where nothing truly bad could ever happen. At the heart of this carefully crafted community lived Daniel Miller, a man who had worked his whole life to afford the home he and his wife dreamed of. It wasn't extravagant, but it was theirs. A two-story with blue shutters, a wraparound porch, and a backyard where his kids spent summers chasing fireflies. For Daniel, the house represented more than just shelter. It was the reward for decades of sacrifice, a safe place to raise his family, and a piece of land he believed he had every right to call his own. The neighborhood seemed welcoming enough when the Millers first moved in. Neighbors stopped by with baked goods, children introduced themselves, and the HOA president even dropped off a packet of community guidelines, smiling as she assured them it was nothing more than helpful reminders. Daniel skimmed the rules but didn't think much of them. After all, how strict could they really be? A fresh coat of paint, a trimmed lawn, keeping trash bins tucked away, nothing out of the ordinary. But beneath the perfectly polished surface, there was something else lurking. An invisible pressure, a quiet tension that only revealed itself once you became part of the community. Little things started to stand out. A neighbor whispering about a lawn being half an inch too long, another grumbling about a mailbox not matching the approved shade of black. And always, the HOA watching, recording, noting every minor detail, as if the neighborhood were less a community and more a carefully guarded showroom. Daniel brushed it off at first. He wasn't the kind of man who cared for gossip or petty complaints. But soon, he would learn that this was no ordinary HOA. These were not just friendly neighbors keeping an eye out for each other. This was a board of enforcers, hungry for control and ready to turn the smallest inconvenience into a weapon. And before long, Daniel's dream home, his safe haven, would become the very battleground for a fight he never asked for, but could not walk away from. At first, Daniel Miller believed the Homeowners Association was nothing more than background noise, a group of neighbors meeting once a month to talk about gardening, recycling, or who would organize the next community barbecue. He had no reason to suspect otherwise. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tone of life in Willow Creek Estates began to change. It started with a letter. A single sheet of paper slipped into his mailbox, printed on heavy, official-looking stationery, stamped with the HOA's seal. Notice of violation, trash receptacle visibility. Daniel frowned as he read the words. According to the notice, he had left his trash cans visible at the side of his garage for more than 3 hours past pickup time. The fine, $75. It seemed absurd. He had pulled the cans back as soon as he got home from work. Yes, a little later than usual, but hardly worth a fine. Still, he shrugged it off. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the HOA just wanted to remind him of the rules. But a week later, another letter arrived. This one is for unapproved lawn growth. His grass, the letter claimed, had grown to an unsightly length of 3.5 inches, when the community maximum was 3.0. Another $150 fine. Daniel laughed at first. How could anyone possibly measure grass to the half-inch? Was someone sneaking around his yard with a ruler? The idea was ridiculous. But the laughter faded quickly, replaced by unease, because it wasn't just the fines. It was the feeling that someone was always watching. Neighbors he barely knew glanced at him differently, their eyes lingering on his driveway, his flower beds, and his mailbox. One evening, he caught a man crouched near his fence, clipboard in hand, jotting something, down before hurrying away. Soon the notices became relentless. A crack in the driveway that disrupted community aesthetics. A garden hose coiled in the wrong direction. A flower pot that didn't match the approved earth tone palette. The fines stacked up faster than Daniel could pay them, and each envelope carried the same cold signature at the bottom. Evelyn Harper, HOA president. Evelyn was the kind of neighbor everyone pretended to admire, but secretly feared. Always perfectly dressed, always smiling too wide, her words sweet on the surface but sharp underneath. She presented herself as the guardian of Willow Creek's beauty and order. But to Daniel, it became clear she was something else entirely, a tyrant with a rule book. And the deeper Daniel looked, the more he realized he wasn't alone. Other residents whispered about similar experiences: fines for kids' bikes left on driveways, for holiday decorations taken down too slowly, for garden fences painted a shade too light or too dark. Some neighbors had given up entirely, paying the endless stream of penalties just to avoid trouble. Others had moved away, leaving behind houses that the HOA quickly resold to eager new buyers, who, inevitably, would face the same cycle. But Daniel wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. He tried reasoning with Evelyn. He attended an HOA meeting, sitting quietly in the back until the floor was opened for questions. When he raised his concerns, pointing out the absurdity of being fined over half an inch of grass, Evelyn cut him off with a saccharine smile. "Mr. Miller, our rules are in place to protect property values. If you cannot abide by them, perhaps Willow Creek is not the right community for you." The room erupted in murmurs, some nodding in agreement, others avoiding his gaze. Daniel felt his face burn. It wasn't just about the fines anymore. It was about power, and the message was clear. Evelyn had it, and he didn't. Over the following months, the harassment escalated. A letter arrived threatening a lien on his home if he didn't pay the mounting fines. A notice warned of further legal action if he continued to violate the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood. Evelyn herself began showing up at his property, clipboard in hand, circling like a hawk. One morning, Daniel woke to find a bright orange sticker plastered on his garage. Final warning: non-compliance. His children saw it before he could rip it down. They asked if they were in trouble, if they were going to lose their home. Daniel's heart sank. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about fear, about humiliation. And then came the breaking point. It was a Saturday, bright and warm, when Daniel decided to repaint his fence. The old paint had chipped, and he wanted to refresh it with a soft white coat. As he brushed on the first strokes, Evelyn appeared, flanked by two board members. "That color is not on the approved palette," she said, her voice cold. "Cease immediately or face a $1,000 fine." Daniel clenched his jaw. "It's my fence, my property." Evelyn's smile widened. "Not if it disrupts the harmony of Willow Creek." That night, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by a mountain of violation letters, unpaid fines, and threats. His dream home, the place he had worked his entire life to build, was becoming a nightmare. The HOA wanted him broken, compliant, or gone. But Evelyn had underestimated him, because Daniel wasn't the kind of man to roll over. He began digging into the HOA's records, into the neighborhood's history, into the very foundation of Willow Creek Estates. And what he uncovered would shake the entire community to its core. Daniel had reached the end of his rope. For months, Evelyn Harper and her HOA board had tightened the noose around his family, drowning him in violation notices, fines, and threats. They wanted compliance. They wanted silence. Most of all, they wanted submission. But Daniel hadn't spent sleepless nights buried in paperwork for nothing. Because buried deep within the property records of Willow Creek Estates, he had found something Evelyn had never expected anyone to see. And tonight, he was ready to use it. The community center was packed, every seat filled, the air thick with whispers. It was the quarterly HOA meeting, the one where Evelyn always stood proudly at the front, smiling as she reminded everyone of their duty to protect the neighborhood's image. Daniel sat near the back, a thick folder clutched in his hand. When Evelyn called the meeting to order, her voice carried the same smug confidence as always. She spoke about rising property values, about recent challenges caused by non-compliant homeowners, about the need for stricter enforcement. Every word dripped with authority. And then she said his name. Before we proceed, I'd like to address the continued violations of Mr. Daniel Miller. She scanned the room, eyes locking on him like a predator. Despite repeated notices and opportunities for correction, Mr. Miller has continued to flout community standards. At this time, the board is moving forward with legal action to place a lien on his property. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel's heart pounded, but he didn't flinch. He stood, folder in hand, and walked slowly toward the front. Funny. You should bring that up, Evelyn, he said, his voice steady. Because I've got some information the community might want to hear before you take my home. All eyes turned to him. Evelyn's smile faltered for the first time. Daniel laid the folder on the table and pulled out a stack of documents. For the past several months, I've been digging into the HOA's authority, where it comes from, what it covers, and most importantly, what it doesn't. And what I found is fascinating. He held up the first page. See, when Willow Creek Estates was established, the original developer filed a set of covenants with the county. Pretty standard stuff. But here's the thing. Those covenants were tied to a parcel of land that includes all of your houses, all of your streets, all of this so-called community. He paused, letting the silence settle. Except one piece. My piece. Murmurs exploded through the room. Evelyn's face paled. That's right, Daniel continued. According to the records, my property, the very lot I built my home on, was never legally brought under HOA authority. The board has no jurisdiction over me. Every fine you've issued, every notice you've taped to my door, every threat you've made, all of it is worthless, illegal. And guess what? He leaned closer, his voice dropping into a razor-sharp whisper. You knew. Evelyn sputtered, her composure cracking. That's absurd. Our documents clearly, your documents are wrong. Daniel slammed the papers onto the table. And I've already had them verified by a real estate attorney. Not only do you have no authority over my property, but your repeated harassment, your fines, your threats of foreclosure, that's grounds for a lawsuit, one I'm more than prepared to file. The room erupted. Some neighbors gasped, others whispered furiously, a few even cheered under their breath. Evelyn tried to regain control, raising her voice above the chaos. This is nonsense. The HOA exists to protect everyone here. Without order, without standards, this neighborhood would what? Daniel shot back. Would collapse if someone's grass grew half an inch too high? Would lose value if a flower pot was the wrong shade of beige? No, Evelyn. This was never about protecting the community. It was about control. About you. Her face flushed deep red. You're a troublemaker, Mr. Miller. A disruptor. And if you think you can bully this board into submission? Daniel reached into the folder one last time and pulled out a single sheet. Oh, I don't need to bully you, because this is a certified letter I'll be sending to the county first thing tomorrow morning. It outlines the HOA's repeated violations of my property rights. the fraudulent fines you've attempted to impose, and the harassment my family has endured. And once it's filed, your reign here is over. Not just for me, but for everyone you've been bleeding dry." Silence fell. For the first time since he had moved into Willow Creek, Evelyn Harper was speechless. And then, from somewhere in the crowd, a voice shouted, "He's right!" Another followed. "They fined me for Christmas lights, and me for my mailbox." Suddenly, the room was alive with outrage, not at Daniel but at Evelyn. Years of bottled-up frustration poured out all at once. Neighbors stood, voices rising, demanding answers, demanding change. Evelyn's carefully constructed image cracked like glass. She stammered, she shouted, she pleaded. But it was no use. The tide had turned. Daniel stood tall, watching as the board scrambled, as the neighbors he once thought indifferent finally found their voices. He felt the weight of months of fear and anger lift, replaced by something else: vindication. But he wasn't finished, because the documents in his hands weren't just proof that he was free from the HOA's grasp. They contained something even more devastating, a technicality buried so deep in the original contracts that it had gone unnoticed for decades. It wasn't just that his land was exempt. It was that the land his house sat on was still legally tied to the original developer. And when that developer dissolved, ownership of the underlying parcel had transferred to its last buyer of record: him. Daniel didn't just own his home. He owned the very land beneath Willow Creek Estates. He let that fact hang in the air as he delivered the final blow. "So here's the truth, Evelyn. You've spent months trying to control me, to crush me under your rules. But what you didn't realize is that all along you've been building your little empire on my land." Gasps shook the room. Evelyn's jaw dropped. "That's right. Legally, every street, every park, even this community center, it all sits on property I hold title to. Which means, technically, you don't get to tell me what to do. I get to tell you." The room erupted again, this time in stunned disbelief. Some neighbors cheered outright, others stared wide-eyed, unable to process the reversal. Evelyn staggered, her face drained of color, her authority crumbling before everyone's eyes. Daniel looked around the room at the faces of the people who had once been too afraid to speak. He felt the tide shift permanently. The balance of power had changed, and for Evelyn Harper, queen of the HOA, the crown had just been ripped away. For a long moment after Daniel dropped his final revelation, the community center felt like it had stopped breathing. Evelyn Harper stood frozen, her eyes wide, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the podium. The room rippled with stunned silence, every neighbor trying to process the seismic shift that had just occurred. And then, slowly, the tide broke. "Is it true?" someone shouted from the back. "My God," another muttered. "He owns the land," a voice whispered, loud enough for half the room to hear. Daniel remained standing at the front, calm but unflinching, the folder of documents still in his hand. He wasn't gloating, but the weight of vindication pressed heavily in the air. Evelyn, for the first time since he had met her, looked powerless, small, fragile, like a monarch stripped of her crown. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She shuffled her papers, searching for words, but the crowd drowned her out. Neighbors who had been silent for years were suddenly on their feet, shouting over one another. Stories of fines, harassment, humiliation, small abuses that had piled up until they felt like chains. It poured out like a dam finally bursting. Daniel raised a hand and the voices quieted, not fully, but enough. "Listen," he said, his voice steady. "I didn't come here to rub this in anyone's face. I came here because I was pushed to the edge, like so many of you. I was threatened, fined, and nearly driven from my own home. All because of an HOA that was supposed to serve the community, not control it." He paused, letting his words sink. And now the truth is out. The HOA has no authority over my property. And by extension, Considering what these documents prove, I hold authority none of you realized I had. But I want to make one thing clear. I don't want to use that power the way Evelyn did. I'm not here to control anyone. I'm here to make sure no one else ever has to go through what my family did. The words struck a chord. Heads nodded. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. For the first time, Daniel wasn't standing alone. Evelyn tried one last desperate move. "This is outrageous!" she snapped, her voice rising in shrill anger. "Even if this paperwork is correct, even if, which I highly doubt, you can't just waltz in here and dismantle an institution that's kept this community thriving for decades. Without the HOA, this neighborhood would fall apart. Property values would plummet. Standards would vanish. People like him," she jabbed a finger toward Daniel, "would destroy everything we've built." But the response wasn't the chorus of agreement she expected. Instead, the crowd erupted in boos. Someone yelled, "You've already destroyed it!" Another shouted, "You've been bleeding us dry!" Daniel didn't need to add anything. Evelyn had destroyed her own credibility. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Board members huddled, neighbors shouted, and Evelyn stormed out of the room, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. For years, she had ruled Willow Creek Estates without question, but now her grip had been broken. And Daniel, the man she had tried to crush, had become the spark of rebellion. The fallout came quickly. Word spread through the neighborhood. Like wildfire, Daniel Miller had exposed the HOA. The man they'd tried to paint as a troublemaker was suddenly a hero. Within a week, Evelyn resigned as HOA president. Officially, she cited personal reasons, but everyone knew the truth. Her empire had collapsed. Without her iron grip, the board fractured. Some members quit outright, embarrassed at having been complicit. Others tried to cling to what little power remained, but their authority was under constant scrutiny. Neighbors who had once whispered complaints now spoke openly. They compared notes on fines, tallied up the thousands of dollars Evelyn's board had siphoned from them over the years, and demanded accountability. Lawsuits began to swirl, homeowners banding together to recover what they had paid in illegitimate penalties, and at the center of it all stood Daniel, not as a ruler, but as a symbol. He hadn't wanted the spotlight. He wasn't seeking fame or power. But his discovery, the fact that he legally owned the very ground beneath Willow Creek Estates, meant he couldn't simply fade back into anonymity. His lawyer confirmed it. Every street, every common area, every inch of land that wasn't tied to an individual deed technically belonged to him. It was overwhelming. At first, Daniel didn't know what to do with that power. He could, if he wanted, dismantle the HOA entirely. He could sell off parcels of land, impose his own rules, even evict the board from their precious community center. The thought was tempting. Sweet revenge served cold. But late at night, sitting at his kitchen table surrounded by the same documents that had nearly driven him mad, he remembered why he had fought in the first place. It wasn't to control. It was to be free. So he made a choice. The next meeting at the community center was unlike any in Willow Creek's history. There was no podium, no raised dais where Evelyn had once stood above her neighbors. Instead, Daniel arranged the chairs in a circle, equal and open. He explained the truth in plain language. "I own the land under this community. That gives me authority, but I don't want to use it the way it was used against me. I'm offering something different, a chance to rewrite the rules together." At first, the crowd was hesitant. People had lived under the HOA's thumb for so long that they couldn't imagine life without it. But as Daniel laid out his plan, hope flickered in their eyes. Instead of fines and punishments, there would be agreements, voluntary commitments neighbors could opt into. Instead of secret board meetings, there would be open discussions. Instead of control, there would be cooperation. He didn't propose chaos. He proposed community. And slowly, the fear began to lift. People spoke up about what rules mattered, what didn't, what they wanted Willow Creek to be, a neighborhood, not a dictatorship. By the end of the night, they had agreed. The HOA would be dissolved. In its place, a simple neighborhood association would exist, one with no power to fine, no authority to harass, only the ability to suggest, support, and organize. For the first time in years, the residents of Willow Creek left a meeting not with dread, but with relief. The changes didn't happen overnight, but over the months that followed, Willow Creek Estates transformed. The endless stream of violation notices vanished. Families decorated their homes without fear of punishment. Kids left their bikes in the driveway without worrying about $200 fines. Lawns grew a little uneven, fences were painted in colors outside the approved palette, and, to everyone's surprise, property values didn't plummet. In fact, they stabilized. Buyers were attracted to a neighborhood free from the big, infamous iron grip of an HOA. Most importantly, the atmosphere shifted. Neighbors talked to each other, not through a board. Disputes were settled with conversations, not threats. The air of paranoia, the feeling that someone was always watching, disappeared. As for Evelyn Harper, she sold her house and moved, away within 6 months. Some whispered she tried to join another HOA in a nearby town, but she never regained her throne. In Willow Creek, her name became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly power could corrupt. Daniel, meanwhile, returned to his life. He tended his garden, repainted his fence, and watched his children play without fear. But he was never quite the same man he had been before the fight. He had seen how fragile freedom could be, how easily ordinary people could be crushed under the weight of petty authority. And he carried that lesson with him always. In the end, Daniel's story wasn't just about one man versus an HOA. It was about something bigger, about the balance of power, about the importance of standing up when you're pushed too far, about remembering that even in the smallest corners of suburban life, justice still matters. He could have used his victory to dominate, to become a tyrant in Evelyn's place. But instead, he chose the harder path, to turn power back into freedom, to replace fear with fairness, and to remind his neighbors of something Evelyn had long forgotten, that a neighborhood isn't built by rules or fines or threats. It's built by people, by trust, by respect. And that's the truth that outlasted every violation notice, every threat, every sleepless night. The truth that turned Willow Creek Estates from a prison into a community. So the next time you hear about a petty HOA, about a neighbor who thinks they own more than they do, remember Daniel Miller. Remember that even when the odds feel stacked against you, sometimes the smallest piece of paper, the deed, the document, the overlooked detail, can tip the balance of power. And ask yourself, if you were in Daniel's shoes, facing a mountain of fines and threats, would you fight back, or would you walk away? Because in the end, the choice he made changed everything.